Hi everyone, my name is Joseph Anajar. I'm a musician from Montreal, Canada, and today we're going to be checking out an excerpt from my course, Intuitive Improvisation. It came out last month, and the response has been super great so far, so I thought it'd be cool to share a section with you guys. This excerpt takes place in the last module of the course and focuses on getting out of your own head while playing and improvising. So yeah, without further ado, I'll cut to the clip, and if you want to check out the whole course, there'll be a link in the description. But yeah, so thank you very much. And if you're already checking it out, I appreciate you. I'll see you guys very, very soon. When I was a bit younger, like 5 to 6 years ago, something that I started noticing when I was doing improvisations or just jamming and performing is that I was often sort of a slave to my mindset and sort of how I was reacting to the playing around me, right? And you might be familiar with this feeling, right? Like you make a mistake and then you kind of keep thinking about this mistake after you made it. And, this is something that happens a lot where like you're anxious and then you kind of mess up the things, right? Or you're playing the song and you know that a guitar solo is coming up and that pressure kind of builds up until the solo happens and then you mess up the entrance because there was so much pressure that you put on yourself, right? Like little things like that. If you're familiar with this feeling, like I may have some things that you could like think about. And this is like mostly having to do with like, I think this is like effortless mastery, Kenny Werner stuff, which someone told me is actually like very heavily referencing like this other book that I haven't read called Free Play. But anyways, the answer to all this is like get out of your head, right? But that's easier said than done. And it takes its own sorts of practice. So I think like without prescribing like very specific things to you, I might just tell you like how I got over it, or at least to the extent that I'm over it now. Because I'm pretty over it. When I have a very carefree, relaxed performing like baseline level at this point. And it's taken me some time, but I'm definitely there now. So anyways, when I was sort of getting to know these concepts and sort of learning about them and reading the book, I started kind of noticing my trains of thoughts and state of minds while improvising. And that's kind of how it clicked with me. I would play, and instead of having the reaction like, oh, fuck, I played a wrong note, and then it throws up my whole confidence, instead of having this thought, I would have the thought, but I would see it sort of as an observer, right? Like something weird would happen. And then like I would observe that my mind state was switching to a more anxious, defensive, like, how do I cover up for this sort of thing? And, that was the first step, right? So I was disconnecting myself from the person that is reacting negatively to this mistake. And so that happened for a while, and I was noticing these things, and I just thought it was interesting. So, kind of meditated on that for a little bit. And further, I also started to notice that when I was doing really good, I would get this very egotistical reaction, right? Like, oh yeah, like I'm doing so great, like I'm killing, like my feel sick, all these like ideas, which I guess have the opposite effect, but still isn't very, very good, right? Like, you don't want anything that you're doing to come from a place of ego, because then you're not being critical and you're not probably still not playing very well. So anyways, I'm noticing both of these sort of these dualities in my mindset while performing, right? The sort of very like anxious, like, oh, like I made a mistake, I hope no one noticed guy, and also this like, oh yeah, I'm killing it, I'm the best guitarist in the world guy. So both of these things are at odds, and now that I'm noticing these things, I'm like a third like observer. And so what I was able to do after a lot of time and sort of exposure to these sort of live performance contexts, right, performing with bands and going to jam sessions in Montreal and all that sort of stuff, is it seemed to me that I've been able to disconnect myself, right, like the who I am, from both of these characters. And so being intentional about this, I think that I've been able to like diminish both of these voices to bring them a bit more like standard, right? So when I make a mistake, I dismiss it right away. It's something that happened. It doesn't matter. We keep going, right? No one, even if everybody noticed, it doesn't really matter. I'll play the mistake again, see if I care, right? Have this sort of attitude where it doesn't really matter. And then on the other side of it, like the egotistical thing, it still happens, like being a guitarist, being a guy that like is into writing music. Like, I'm not going to say that I have like, that I'm the most like humble guy. Like I'm fairly confident about some of these things, but the sort of egomaniac reaction to it, I've calmed down to this idea that if I'm doing well, like it serves the music and it's good, and I can tap into this like higher purpose of the why I have to perform at this level. But anyways, all these sort of these sorts of like intentional mindset switches for me have like, made it so that I'm fairly in the moment and sort of intentional with how I feel when I play and where I draw my ideas from, and how the band around me affects my sort of bodily reactions and sort of emotional like reactions to these things. And I guess like to sort of give you like another buzzwords from my notes over here, like this makes me get out of my own head, right? This sort of feeling, the sort of vicious cycle of making a mistake and sort of dwelling on it, and then the opposite of like doing something that is kind of cool and then dwelling on it, are both really bad. And if you get out of these mindsets and you are sort of brought back and able to focus on the greater purpose of this solo that you're playing, whatever the purpose might be, I feel like everything starts to come from a more authentic place. And also the performance gets better. It's a very noticeable like side effect, is when you kind of get out of your own head, the greater like the sort of the big picture description of your solo tends to be like of higher quality. But it also makes it that your emotional state after performances are more baseline. I no longer get affected emotionally in either direction after a good or a bad performance, right? Like when I was younger, a bad performance would make me feel like garbage. I'm just like, man, like I need to practice. Like everybody knows, like it was so bad. I couldn't take a compliment, all this sort of stuff. And then the opposite was true, right? Like, I would have a good performance and then I was just like on a manic episode afterwards because I played like pretty well. So now like I'm just like really happy to play music regardless of the level of performance. That I play a lot of bad gigs, and even on the bad gigs, like I'm like thankful for the experience. Obviously there's performances where I'm just like, man, like, the one time I do a gig that I would have rather like not have done, like I feel like a little bit of a waste of time. But at the end of the day, maybe I have a couple beers with the drummer and he's a nice guy and we had a good hang, So these sorts of things where you kind of separate your ego from either extremes kind of bring you to a more manageable baseline where you can then once again focus on the music rather than focusing on how the music is making you feel and thus affecting the performance, right? You want to sort of cut this vicious cycle. I don't know if everything that I'm talking about is too abstract right now, but hopefully like some of it is making sense. But this is very much a sort of personal journey that I find like I've been on, and especially pre-COVID, post-COVID, because I wasn't performing for a couple of years, obviously, right? Because nothing was happening. I see the change in how grateful I am to have the ability to express myself on a stage, right? And this is also a feeling that kind of keeps me going and keeps me from having this egotistical reaction to stuff that is happening that is bad or good. And the characterization of music being bad or good or performing being bad or good is already something that is sort of that you decide for yourself, right? Not in any like, I'm not going to say that there is no bad music or no good music. Like there's definitely stuff that sucks, but like it's a concept that you are ascribing for yourself where someone that you might respect even might think it was a great performance if you thought it was bad. So because these things are sort of self-inflicted, it's not worth it. Like you can have this attitude where you can think like, oh, I don't really have the time to feel bad about my music, right? Or like, well, I'm not getting paid enough for this gig. I'm not getting paid enough for this gig to also feel bad about a couple mistakes that I played, right? I might as well have a good time. And there's a lot of these like different like ways you can think about it to kind of separate that. But at the end of the day, like if the music is the main thing that's important, you need to separate your ego from it and then focus back on the music. And that takes some time, right? Like people want to perform because they want to look cool and all that stuff. And then after that, after you kind of go through this phase, like everybody does, at some point you'll come back to wanting to focus on the music, and getting out of your head is a big part of doing all this stuff.